Welcome to the 4Q podcast. My name is Sheena Shuey. I'm a therapist who specializes in anxiety, burnout, and relationship issues, and truthfully, all the underlying stuff that brings that forward. I'm also a business coach. So in this podcast, we talk all things life, business, love, relationships, and everything in between. So let's get into today's episode. Oh, Steve, I am so excited to have a chat with you today. Welcome to the 4Q podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks, Sheena.
Oh, I know. It's so funny. I laugh that we met at a networking thing and then we run into each other at the gym.
Yeah.
That was just so funny. I had to laugh about that.
Yeah, I know. I was actually surprised to see you because I follow you. I follow your podcast show. I follow you on socials, and to get the tap on the shoulder and look around and say, "Oh, whoa, it's Sheena. How are you?" Yeah, it was
Especially
really
because
good.
our networking event was so far from where we actually
It
both,
was.
you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So, for those who are listening, we are doing an amazing guest podcast today with Steve. And as usual, we are going to follow our 4R formula of reflecting, redefining, redesigning, and realigning. That is the formula that we will always use in your coaching and in your life because we need to reflect on who we are, redefine a few things for ourselves. We need to redesign our life from there. And then we need to ask ourselves, how do we stay aligned or realigned? When things start to go off track or when we start to lose focus, how do we come back? So I'm so lucky to have Steve with us today. So Steve, if we can reflect now on you, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Give us a bit of your bio?
Yeah, sure. I I'm 53 years young, Sheena.
Love
Uh,
that.
I feel probably I've got a 25-year-old daughter and a 19-year-old daughter. So, my wife and I, Catherine is my wife. We've kind of got through those years now of, doing the kids. And I'm a bit sad about that, to be honest. I do miss the young kids. Although I was away a lot working and, traveling for work. And, my wife probably done the hard yards there as most of the women do.
Mhm.
I miss those times when I could come home from work and my little baby would come and run up to me and give me a cuddle, or would go to Westfields, and they'd hold your hand. They'd hold your hand because they were little and they didn't sort of think otherwise. So I miss those times with my girls, my two girls. Um, I've I've been working for myself since 2005, and we'll go into a little bit about how that all worked. But I've run two companies now. I had a telco company which I sold, and I currently own a marketing company out of Bangkok, Thailand, which
Wow.
I'm no longer. I'm actually retired from. I have my staff running that business for me, so I'm very grateful for that. I moved to this great country of Australia back in 1993, October 1993. I remember I'm from New Zealand originally. I remember leaving Wellington, windy Wellington, they call it, Sheena. And it was like, it must have been like 12 degrees and it was freezing, I remember. And then I landed in Sydney and it was like 40 plus and it was just hot. And I just thought to myself, whoa, whoa. But it took me a couple of days to get around, and I just thought, wow, what a country. I went into Sydney and I just thought, wow, there's so much in Bondi, and northern beaches. And I just thought, wow, there's so much opportunity in Australia.
Mhm.
And it's where I've been. I've become an Aussie probably about 10, 11 years ago now. So married Catherine in Sydney, and yeah, life's been pretty good. I've had my ups and downs. We've had our ups and downs, but we kind of soldier through, Sheena. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. What a journey. So, and I love the acknowledgement to your wife, Catherine, because I think a lot of the listeners will understand, a lot of our listeners are female and they get the whole, we don't get the recognition of, we're putting our lives on hold, we're putting our careers on hold, or we might be, our job is actually to raise these children, right? So, that I think they'll really appreciate that, as well as for me, someone who's in that phase where I've got young kids and it's exhausting. So sometimes that reminder of, they're not going to hold my hand forever and they're not going to give me the cuddles and kisses forever. And, they're going to grow out of that one day. I think it's a good reminder.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's great. I remember this one weekend my wife went away, and so it was for about a week. I think she went by her mum's in Sydney. And so I had to take care of the kids by myself. And I think we had like takeaway every single night. And my daughter, she wanted me to do her hair, like
Yeah.
plait her hair or something like that. Um, it didn't go very well, Sheena, at all. And I thought I'd done an absolutely brilliant job, only to be told later that yeah, it wasn't that good, mum, by my kids. So I tried my best, but I appreciate the role of women and especially the role that they play in the home. And it's significant and it's important.
Yeah, yeah. And, unfortunately, I think for a lot of us, we're heading down the way of it's really financially difficult to not have both partners working. So a lot of women are falling into, not only are they doing a lot of the cooking, a lot of the cleaning, a lot of the house stuff, kids, etc., but they have to work on top of that. It's a huge load for both parents as well, right? Like both of you having to do that, it's big. And then to do business on top of that, right? And to have the energy for business, for showing up as your best self. It's a lot, yeah?
You got to be a bit crazy, don't you, Sheena? Um, it's not made for everybody, but we get through it and we just kind of make it work. Yeah.
Well, I mean, what's the alternative? Working for someone else in a cubicle, just being another number, not really being appreciated for the rest of your life? I mean, that's the alternative, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Look at I've been down there. I've been down that corporate ladder working for, a couple of big multinationals and, that company car and those 4 weeks holidays. They're really nice though, but but like they're really good at the time and you think, oh, well, if I can become that, then I can push myself up here. And, when I was thinking like that, I was like, I was just so gun ho in trying to climb that corporate ladder to just so I could provide for my family and take care of them a little bit better. Um, but I later found out it's kind of a trap. That if you don't find a way out, if you don't intentionally find a way out of it, you'll get stuck there until you're 60. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that's the story because, in my industry, so as a health professional, working for government is like the gold star, right? Of, okay, first of all, you have to be relatively good to work for government because it is the industry choice, right? The employer of choice for our industry because it's got good maternity leave, good super, good, sick leave, annual leave, all the things. But it wears people out, it burns them out. I did everything I could to get that government job and it sucked the soul out of me. So I got this gold star, did all the things, did all the accomplishments, did all the degrees, only to get there and go, this is not what I wanted. Not to mention, it was an 8.5 hour day. I had to
Yeah.
commute there. I somehow had to get myself ready, get the kids ready, feed the dogs, do the things, get in the car. It was just chaos. And, I think a lot of people just go, submit to that and go, I work so hard for this. But then, admittedly, I left very early because I already knew it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
But if I had got a promotion very early, I would have been there. I would have just climbed that corporate ladder because it would have fed into my achievement as self-worth story, right? Of, oh, I get the gold stars, oh, I'm on the next pedestal, oh, I'm on the next pay grade. It's really easy to fall into that, not realizing that people are making twice as much as what you earn in far less hours, far less stress. You don't realize that until you're exposed to it, right?
100%. And that's the trick, is to do what you done, is to try to learn that principle early on so that you can intentionally get out of it as quick as possible. I learned it probably a little bit later than I would have liked to. And the only thing that was holding me back, the fear that was holding me back, is that I had a mortgage in Sydney. I had two little kiddies, and I had a wife who didn't work either. She worked in the home, which is the most important part, but she didn't bring an income in. So I felt like I was stuck, and I couldn't get out of that. But I always wanted to do something for myself, but I just didn't know how to. And I felt like I'm stuck. This is going to be me for the next, until I'm 60, 65 now. So
Yeah.
that's how I felt. Yeah.
Yeah, and that stuck feeling, I think a lot of us can relate to. And even when I quit that job, I had another job that was better, but not the best. It was like it was the best job I could have possibly had outside of working for myself. So I sort of had the two jobs going, the government one and this other one, working for a big corporate that again was the best job I could have had, but it was still scary walking away from that government job that I had set my eyes on for literally years, and a specific role that I had wanted literally for years. And
Yeah.
the financials of that too, the scaredness. But I was really lucky timing wise. Again, the synchronicities, I believe in synchronicities, not coincidences, right? I think everything happens in hindsight, you get it, but during the time you don't. I remember being so conflicted, going, oh my gosh, this is such a good opportunity. So many of my co-workers, my colleagues would have loved to have the opportunity that I had, but I was hating it. And I knew that actually there were other teams I could have gone in that probably could have been better. Uh, but for some reason, I ended up in a role that I hated, and I knew I wasn't meant to be there. And so I still had the same things too: young kids, mortgage, like bills to pay. But where I was on my spiritual path at that time was about just take a leap of faith. I kept hearing things of you've got to take a leap on yourself, you've got to have some faith. But if that had happened 2 years earlier, I wouldn't have left. Like it was just where I was spiritually at that time. I was able to have some faith that I know what I want and I know that it's coming. I just have to take the leap. So I was lucky in that way. But I'm curious for you, how did you end up leaving the stuckness when you have all these responsibilities, kids, mortgage, wife, etc.? What was your journey to kind of leaving that?
Yeah, it was. I still remember the morning, Sheena. I got stuck by my unstuckness, by basically being told that I never had a job anymore. And I remember that morning very clear. I was on my way into work, and my boss rang me up and said, "Look, there's going to be some changes." And I had no clue that this was coming. 100% no clue. I was actually really enjoying what I was doing, and I had just no clue. And then he says, "Hey, listen, unfortunately, we're going to have to let you go." And when I heard those words, I thought, I will never ever hear those words again in my life.
Mm-mm.
It was something happened to my brain. Something happened, struck me right then at that time, Shanna. And all I could think about was my two girls. My youngest one, she was just born, and the other one was like 6, and
Mm.
my wife. And I thought, I'm going to get through this, and I'm going to win this, because I believed I was destined to get out. But sometimes, like you say, in your spiritual path, things just come up, and you need to be pushed out, right, in order to get to where you need to get to, or want to get to. And so, yeah, I remember just I continued to go into the office. I remember getting my box from my desk. It was kind of embarrassing, Jenna. I remember it was
It's
because
such an ego blow because you put so much time and energy into making this a part of who you are that it does feel like, oh my, I'm packing up my identity into this cardboard box.
100%. And I feel like when I walked in, everybody knew but me. And I went in to get my box, and I was putting everything in my box, and people were coming in saying goodbye and everything, and good people. It wasn't their fault. It's just a decision that the company had made. And um, yeah, I just remember going home that day and ringing my wife, and I was terrified. I was scared. I
Yeah.
was really, really, really scared. Don't get me wrong. I'm not, I was terrified. I thought, well, I'm going to get a final pay probably in about a week's time, and then after that, um, I don't know what I'm going to do. I just don't know what I'm going to do. And so I
Mm.
knew I had to take some bold moves. So that day, I started my company.
That
I
same
think
day.
that day I went into, I think it wasn't online because this was back in 2005. So I actually went to the office and filled out my ABN and all of that kind of stuff and created my company. And I said, I'm starting today. Me and my wife jumped in the car because I went to I went to go and get my box, went home. My wife and I jumped in the car. We went down to the local office and started it, got my ABN number. And
Wow.
I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do, but I'll do something. Yeah.
Wow, that's wild because I guess if we could go a bit deeper, I'm curious how you had that mindset and like you're saying, you sort of said this is a shit situation, but I'm going to come out and I'm going to win. Not everyone has that. There are a lot of people who can fall into things like this always happened to me. Okay, I better start looking for other jobs. What am I going to do? Like and I think that's important. I think we need to acknowledge those feelings and those fears sometimes because otherwise if you don't acknowledge it, it can get bigger. But I'm really curious, like whether it's a personal development thing you did or spiritually or whatever that might be. Why do you think you were able to have that mindset when something so awful and so unexpected happened that you're able to go, but I'm going to come out of this and I'm going to win and I'm going to go get my ABN today because not a lot of people would do that.
No, no. Look, I think I was prepared as a young boy. I was always kind of entrepreneur. I never came from an entrepreneur. My dad was a blue collar worker. My mum was a cleaner. And so I never had the example within my home of somebody working for themselves. But I always knew that I always wanted to work for myself. I didn't even know what that meant. I just thought it was cool. And so that there was always kind of a fire that was burnt inside of me. But when I was working for somebody, it was always just flickering off and on, Jenna. But there was always the hope, and I would always read motivational books and business books, and so there was always something there. Um, and so when this happened to me, that just lit the fire. The flame just burned brighter, and it just gave me the opportunity for that flame to be brighter. So it was always there. I just needed to be pushed, and I was pushed. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. And I know that we touched on this briefly before, that not everyone is made to be a business owner or an entrepreneur. What do you think is some of those characteristics? Because obviously, like you're saying, like you didn't grow up witnessing it. You didn't really grow up around business owners or other entrepreneurs or anything. So do you have any idea, like, what do you think are those traits that some people are just made for it, or some people have something and some people maybe don't have those traits? What do you think that is, or those traits could be?
Yeah, that's a good question, Shannon. I'd like to say that from the moment that I got my ABN to now, everything just went smooth, right? I'd like to say that, but the reality is it's 100% not like that. As a matter of fact, we moved from Sydney to Brisbane, and I actually went back to get a job because I got too scared. Um, and it was a great job, Shannon, with a multinational, great job. But I was about 3 months into the job, and I said, I can't do this anymore. I just can't do this. I'm
Mhm.
just pulling myself. And so I went up to my boss and I says, I've got to quit. And he just looked at me as if I had like an eye in the middle of my head because this was a job. He said, you do realize, right? This job, hundreds of applicants went for. Like, this is a great job. I said, I know it is, but I can't give justice to the job and I have to leave. And so here I was back again, just like day one again, starting back out in business. So, but my point there, Sheena, is that just because you start a business, as you would know, doesn't 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 mean you're going to be successful at all. As a matter of fact, most most startups actually don't get past the first 5 years, let alone the first 12 months. So um, I think in answer to your question, though, for me, and I can only speak to myself, is that I had a lot of self-belief in myself. I wasn't arrogant. I wouldn't say I was arrogant, but I just believed in me. I believed I could do something, and I believed I could get it done. And where I fell short, I knew I had some ground to make up on. I'd just really work hard. I'd work really hard to learn that skill set, or to learn that personality skill, or whatever you needed to get
Mhm.
there. So for me, it was also the ability to overcome rejection for me, because I was rejected many times in business, um, and the ability just to flick it off. Um, I become a little bit hardened in that way. Like no's no's to me meant, oh well, not quite now, but
Mhm.
just come back to me later on. That's how I looked at a no. Um, and in many situations that actually occurred. So, and the ability to handle risk. I think the ability to handle risk was a big one for me too, Sheena.
Yeah.
Uh, is that I could identify risk, I could handle it, and I could just work things out really quickly. I was pretty good at that too. Yeah.
So like problem solving, you think might be a big trait?
I think it problem solver. I was always a good talker, so I could talk myself out of things. I'm a hustler. If you
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
if you look at those entrepreneurial typos, whatever they call, I'd probably be a hustler. And I got good business partners who were opposite to me. So where they were strong, um, I was not strong, and vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. And there's a few things I want to touch on because I think the job and self-employment thing. So sort of, I think that is actually a really great model for a lot of people, and I have done that myself for a long time. And depending on where you're at, if you want to buy a house, sometimes to keep the bank and the overlords happy, they want to see consistent revenue and income. And so sometimes, particularly when you're first starting, I actually think it is really great to work for someone else and do the side hustle thing. Because I think sometimes, and not all business coaches are like this, but there is this sort of some business coaches are like, oh well, if you're not in it every single day, you're not taking it seriously. And the thing is that sometimes you need to dabble a little bit, dip your toe in while you're still working to sort of get it figured out. So I think speaking to that, like, look, I was a bit scared. So I had the security of employment, but I was still always knowing that I was going to work for myself, right? I think that's a good space to be in because sometimes for financial reasons, like I said, keeping the bank happy, sometimes they like employed people rather than business owners because as business owners we tend to show that we don't make much profit because of tax reasons, but the bank wants to see us making profit, so there's a lot of accounting and finances and all that complicated stuff. But in the beginning you just need that self-belief, and I think that's a really interesting concept, just saying like the reason that you was able to do some of this is you had a self-belief in yourself, and backing yourself. I'm curious, do you feel, where do you think that came from too? Because I think that's a skill that you can learn, and I feel like I've definitely had to learn that for myself. But for you, where do you think that self-belief or being able to back yourself came from? Because again, not everyone can do that.
Yeah, I just think I'm just rigorously a positive. I'm just a positive guy.
Hmm.
And it's I don't know where that come from. My mum always asks where that come from. Um, but I've just always been really positive, and I've always been really like, if you can think of me at school, I'm like a good mate to have around. Like, I'd always be the ones looking out for my mates and saying, "Hey, you can do this. Hey, let's do that." And
Mm.
taking care of them. And I've always been, and that's one of, I guess, one of my good traits is that I've always been really, really positive, and I've looked at things that, well, yeah, that can be done. Yeah, I can do that. When my school teachers would say, "Well, no, no," I would say, "No, I can do that. I can get that done." And so I guess that's where it comes from, is just the overwhelming positiveness that I have and belief in myself, really, and not bordering on arrogance, because I tell you what, I have a lot enough mates around me and people around me who would tell me straight away if I was getting a bit ahead of myself. You know what I'm saying?
And I'm starting, not starting, I should say, I really realize the importance of having people who build you up, but having people who keep it real too. I think you can't not have one or the other, right? Like you can't, you know what I mean?
Oh, you need those people, don't you, Sheena? Is those people, they're your best mates. They're the good ones to have around. Not the yes people, but the people who are saying, "Hey, yeah, nah, nah," you know. And
Yeah,
that's, for me,
exactly.
that's normally my wife.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, and I think that's the hard part, because I think it is often your partner, and there's a balance, right, between you want someone who backs you, but you don't want someone who dampens your dreams. Like I used to find conversations, with my partner, it was difficult because there was that they were keeping it real with me, but I didn't want to live in reality. I wanted to live in Delulu land, right? Like I wanted to be delusional about my dreams, and I wasn't able to take it, I think, as what it was, which is just sort of keeping it real a little bit, because I was just so ambitious, and I was a problem solver too. Like I don't like looking at the problems and not the solutions. I'm very much like, well, that can be overcome. I don't know how to do it, but I can figure it out. And I think the difference was with us is that, admittedly, they probably had more of an employee mindset, whereas I was more of a business mindset. And I just knew that regardless, I was going to make it work for myself.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I love that song by Kenny Rogers. It's the one that, "Don't fall in love with a dreamer." And it's always a song that when my wife and I hear that song, we have a bit of a chuckle, because the poor thing, she fell in love with the dreamer, and I've always been the dreamer. But you're right, 100%. Sometimes the dreamer just needs to be brought back into reality sometimes. And she's good at doing that at specific times without kind of dampening the
Yes.
the fire, if you like. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of that, like you mentioned, I think is a really important thing to mention, is handling the no's and handling the risk. Because I think the thing is, we've all heard that saying, no risk, no reward. But what does that actually mean in real life, right? And I didn't really realize until I was in business of my own, of sometimes you're going to spend money and you don't know if that's coming back, and not just small amounts of money. It's going to be big amounts of money, probably more than you've ever spent. But that stretches you because, I think you would have seen I recently did a podcast episode where I spent $2,000 for 1 hour,
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
and it stretched me because now, if any of my clients are like, "Oh, Sheena, it's a 6 month program and I want to charge them 2,000 and I don't know if that's too much," I'm like, "Bro, I paid 2,000 for 1 hour and you're telling me you don't want to charge someone 6 months for $2,000?" You know what I mean? Like, it's it stretched me even without whatever I got from that coaching, right? But that is the risk. it made me money, but the risk was that I was spending that on something I was not going to get an investment back on, but I had to take that risk, right?
Yeah, yeah. I've always found, Sheena, that whenever I've taken big risks in my business, calculated risks, that's when I've actually grown the most. So the first time I employed somebody, and I didn't know how I was going to pay them because the business wasn't quite up there yet to pay them. But I just knew that if I could get them selling X amount per week, I could pay them. Um, so every time, I guess my point is, every time you take a big risk, um, you just jump so much further ahead than what you would have if you didn't take the risk. And every time I've taken the risk in business, it's always paid off for me. Always paid off for me.
And I think it surprises yourself too. And, at the risk of sounding cliche, we did catch up again in the gym. We ran into each other at the gym. I think it's the same as that. I don't know if the listeners have had this experience. Hopefully you've had this in some capacity where it's either a personal trainer or maybe you just feel lit up that day and you push yourself. So maybe you're always lifting, for example, 20 kilos on a certain machine, and that week you're like, I'm going to go for 25. I don't know. I'm just going to push it. I'm just going to see what happens. I'm just going to add this, and I might not make it, and I might not lift it, whatever. And then you do it, and you go, what the hell? I just lifted, whatever. It could be 100 kilos, could be 150, but sometimes, you need that personal trainer to actually go, this is what we're doing. Even if you just get one done, you got one done. I don't care. You are not saying no to this. So sometimes you need that personal trainer, right, to hold you. Or sometimes you just walk in and you just have that fuck it attitude of like, let's just see what happens. And I think you need to have that, right? That's what risk really looks like in business, is going, I don't know how this is going to fold, but I'm going to grow from this regardless.
Yeah, oh, 100%. Yeah. It's scary. It's exhilarating. It's there's so many feelings in it. But once you've jumped, you're free. That's the way I feel. Once you've jumped into that decision, you just feel free. You feel, well, whatever happens now, I made the decision. And just like in your podcast, when you paid 2,000, I love that podcast, by the way. It wasn't about the $2,000 at all. It was about where it took you mentally, and how it created you. Then yeah, I enjoyed that. Thank you.
Yeah, and well, thank you for the positive feedback, obviously. But recently I shared with for some of my listeners as well as in my Facebook group and on my Instagram Live. My word of the year is expansion, because I want to ask myself every single day, what does the most expansive version of Sheena do? And when it really comes to, you've got to act from a place of the person you want to be. The
Mm.
person I want to be doesn't think about $2,000 for the hour, because they know that I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to learn what's put into a $2,000 per hour offer. I'm going to learn how do they have the confidence to charge that and rock up. What else I learned from that? So many things. I learned she did not have a sales page for that offer. She did not have anything. I literally bought that in the DMs of Instagram, like just messaging. So I learned just from that experience already how to sell in the DMs, in the messaging, right? Like there was so much that went into it, but I'm already in that mindset of I'm going to absorb everything around me, right? And so I think it's really important to act from the future version of you, the most expansive version of you, because they're the ones who are going to get you to where you want to be, right? And I'm loving this quote that's been going around for the last 6 months for everyone, which is like, the thoughts and the actions that got you here are not the thoughts and the actions that are going to get you over there, right?
Beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful. So much in that, right? So much in that quote, but it says a lot. It's beautiful. I've heard it go around too, and it's yeah, it really makes you think and consider where you're at and where you need to be.
Yeah, and again, if you're listening to this and you haven't started a business, or maybe you've been dabbling in it, I really hope that you're picking up some of these nuggets from Steve and myself as well, because it's not an easy journey. And you absolutely, like, you need your dreamers around you, you need your realists around you, you need the personal trainers or your coaches or the people who are they're gonna push you when you think you can't be pushed. They're gonna tell you the exact next action to take when you're looking at the list and you're going, what do I do next? What do I say next? What do I action next? They go, don't worry about the rest of the list. Do these three things and then we'll get to it, right?
Yeah.
I think this is
I,
all.
I know you subscribe to this too, Sheena. I mean, say, because I've heard you say it before, is that, often we look at, we talk about assets, we talk about our, property as being an asset. So you want to invest in property, you want to invest in the share market, you want to invest in a business. But the most important asset that we don't invest in is actually us. And I know I've heard you say this on your podcast shows. Me, you, your listeners, you're actually the number one asset that you should be investing in, because if you don't invest in yourself, all the other assets, they either don't come to fruition, or they just won't get you to the point where you want to be. So it's really important to invest in yourself. And yeah, even now I have a coach, I have a mentor, a coach, I have a PT. I even invest in a counselor. I never ever thought I would need a counselor, but I've invested in a counselor. So I guess my point is that, go out there and spoil yourself sometimes. Go and get that massage. Go and have a massage. Go and have that ice cream, or and when you look in the mirror, you know, just say, I'm beautiful, I'm handsome, whatever works, because it's really important that we can see ourselves in our best version. Just like you say, just like you just said, is that, we want to be the person that we are in the future. So we got to act like that. We got to act like that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you're exactly right. We're the number one asset, and you've got to show yourself that you're worthy of that, because people can feel when there's a lack of confidence, a lack of self-worth. And I guess that brings me back to that backing yourself and that self-belief, Steve, because you said that's you feel like that's been a big part of, your successes and your business and who you are today. And I know for me, that wasn't easy, as a teenager and even into my early 20s, even into my 20s, I just didn't really have great self esteem. I really got my self worth from achievement. So it was like, get the degree, I feel good, then it's back down to what's the next thing? What's the next thing? I was very much, I tied my esteem to achievement, and it's taken a lot of work, therapy, business coaching, you name it, I've done it. Reiki, floats, massages, haircuts, whatever you want to call it. But now, I shared this on my stories the other day. I could be sitting in a closet, with my hair a mess and whatever, and I have the highest esteem because I back myself now. And for me, my journey was, yeah, doing all of those things for myself, but it also, when I first really started doing business, I made a point of my home office. I really invested in that. I didn't necessarily invest in myself at that time, like maybe whatever, but having a nice office, a desk to sit at, like a nice painting, whatever, there was something about this is what future Sheena does for herself. And so even though I still had some self-esteem issues, I was able to sit at that desk and go, I feel good here. I feel powerful, empowered, whatever it was here. But it's been a journey, and it's only really even been the last year or two that I'm like, I just back myself, and I know that I can accomplish things, and I'm a good problem solver, etc. But it has been a long ass road, okay? And so I'm curious for you. You feel? I remember you mentioned like backing yourself, that self belief. You think has been a big part of your entrepreneurial journey. Where do you think you got that?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Big question.
Yeah, it's a really good question because, as a young kid, I remember my mum because I wear glasses. And I remember once when my mum was angry at me, she called me Four Eyes, and man, that cut me to the bone. And I never ever put my glasses on for the next 10 years, and I
Oh,
suffered at school because of that. And just being called names and all of that kind of stuff. I think, Sheena, for myself, it was really something that come inwards for me. I kind of had a battle with myself and thought, well, nah, I'm not settling. No, I'm not settling for to be around people like that. I don't know where it come from. I I would say it comes from God. I'd like to say it comes from a God, but it's something like you say, you've also, just because you've got it, or I don't want to say it's a special gift because everybody's got it, right? But I think you got to work on it. And I remember just last week somebody said something really nasty to me, and it kind of affected me for half an hour. And but because I've trained my brain and just the way I am now, I was able to flick it off. But I could see if I never had those skill sets, that it would really pull me down into the dungeons. And um yeah, I just think being positive, it's not hard to be positive, but it is really hard if you're not positive. Like if you always continually look at the glass is half full. It's really hard. Half empty. It's really hard to look at it as half full. And like you say, you've got to invest in yourself, invest and spend money, and that's hard. People don't like spending money, but you've really got to invest in yourself in order to get to that place where you can say, I got this, and just flick it off. Whatever anybody says, or when you get a no in business, or when people say nasty things about you, it's just you can just flick it off. But it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. And listening to people like you and your podcast really helped that journey too.
oh, you're so sweet, Steve. But and I think that's why my previous podcast guest Jackson, he's also a therapist, and that's the thing is that I think everyone should go to therapy at some point because it's a personal development. It's not just you know it helps you understand why do I not back myself? Where does the self-worth stuff come from? Like you're saying, these childhood experiences that our parents give us, that we go through, that's where our core beliefs come from. And if we don't create awareness around core beliefs and then action that, we can get stuck in it. So I guess going back to that analogy of lifting more in the gym, right? So the you go to yourself, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put 100 kilos on. I've never done this before, but stuff it. I'm either going to make it or I don't. You go in, and I think the thing about backing yourself is if you go to lift it and nothing happens, it ain't moving. And you go, okay, are you the person that's like, you know what? My body's just not like this. I'm just not made for this. Or are you the person that goes, not yet. I can't lift that yet, but I will one day. Maybe I'll go back, but at least I tried. Like better to have tried and failed to have never tried at all, right? And I think that's the thing is that there's been so many failures for me in business. Again, the same with the no's, but it's almost like you build your tolerance, you build your fear tolerance, your stress tolerance, your no tolerance. And again, that's why one of the things that I'm doing this year for myself is something that scares me every single day. It could be a controversial post, it could be coming on here this podcast and being more vulnerable than I've ever been. If it gives me a little bit of a like, oh, do I want to say that? Do I want to put that out there? Oh, can I do that? That little breathe, that's when I know I'm heading in the right direction because it doesn't always work out. And I think it's a muscle, right? It's a tool that we can use, but you have to anticipate it. So with the rejection, with the no's, right? I learned about this, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, Steve, but only 1 to 2% of your audience will buy. So it's the same for if you email 100 people maybe 1 to 2, if you're lucky, 5 people will email you back. If you're just like, hey, blah, 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 this is me, I'd love to connect, I'd love to hear from you. Maybe you only engage with 5 people. And so a lot of the time when I'm coaching clients, they're like, oh, Sheena, I sent 5 emails out and I didn't hear from anyone. I'm like, 5? Get back
Mm.
to me when you've sent 100 emails, right? But that's the hard part. That's the hard part in going, oh my gosh, like this is actually harder than I thought. But it's going to be okay because I've been with other people who've been through it too, right?
Yeah, 100%. I love your analogy with the gym. I think it's so true. And I love, January in the gym is pretty busy because you get all those people who have got the New Year's resolutions. And the other day I was there and this lady, she was quite large. With all respect, she was quite large, but I just loved seeing her there because I'd never seen her there before. And I'm normally there in the mornings and I kind of know everybody, you get to know everybody, say hi and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I could tell that she was new and she was a little bit apprehensive and looking around, head down. But I remember just going up to her and I just said to her, and she didn't even know me. I just said to her, well done, well done.
Hmm.
And I could see her lift her head up. And I think people just need a little bit of encouragement sometime and feel like they're in a safe place and that they can do this because a lot of people can do a lot of things, Sheena. Like people, when they put their minds to it, put their hearts to it, it's quite remarkable what they can do. They can actually do a lot more than they give themselves credit for. Sometimes they just need that person, that something, that book, that podcast, Sheena's podcast, just to push them, just to give them that encouragement to get them over the line. And they can do it. And then they go, wow, I done it. I done it. And then you've got the people on the sideline going, yeah, yeah, you got this, you got this. I love those people, Shanna. I just love being around those people who just give it a crack, not, have a go, mate, they say in Australia, right? Just have a go, mate. And that's why I say to everybody, just have a go. Who knows what's going to happen?
And just briefly before we start to wrap up, but I know you and I had a brief conversation about that tall poppy syndrome in Australia and New Zealand as well, where the problem I think sometimes around starting a business, growing a business, is that we're around people who are, yeah, cut down the tall poppies of like, oh, look at you trying. I remember when I went to high school, like being a try hard was a payout. Like, oh, you try hard. Like, literally, someone is trying hard at doing something and you want to pay them out. So that's, I think, the complex we have in Australia versus places like, America, Canada, is that we don't want to be seen trying. It's like there's something about, I'm just going to cut you down, or worse, if you try and fail, it's like, oh, see, you weren't better than us. You thought you were going to be better than us, but you ain't better than us. And it's
Yeah.
like, I think we're starting to change that in communities like you and I went to, like that entrepreneur summit that we went to where we met each other. That is a room full of people who were like, oh my God, I'm so happy that you tried and failed. On to the next, let's go.
Yeah.
Right? Like you need to get in those rooms because if you're constantly around the small town people who are like, yeah, don't think you're bigger than your boots, right? You can't grow around that.
Yeah, you can't, unfortunately. It's those connection fibers that, yeah, you and I, that's where we first met, which was awesome. And look, now we're here on I'm grateful to be on a Sheena podcast. But it's those connection fibers. And so, if there's anything that I can say to, your audience is, find those people that lift you up, those people who are gonna, who say attaboy, that those, yeah, you got this, you want to be around those kind of people and those people that don't, and sometimes that's your closest family members. I'm not saying don't just cut them out of your life. I'm just saying just talk to them about family things rather than about business things. Just talk to them about other things in your life. But you're so right about America. I went to the US in March and April of last year, and for business. And man, I just love the attitude in that country. They are just so behind. Yeah, you got this. You can do this. I'm like, whoa, this is cool. Made me want to move there, but not really because Australia's the best country in the world.
Yeah, and it's that fine line, right? Of like, I know that some of the American coaches rub me up the wrong way because I'm like, gosh, they're arrogant. And so it's that fine line between, you've got to do what's right for you. Is that, yeah, you got to find your people because out of 100 coaches, you might like 50 of them, and 50 of them, they're just not going to be your cup of tea, and that's okay. But you got to get in the rooms with people who are going to be more similar to you. Because for me, I felt so awkward networking, particularly when I was still, oh yeah, I've got this business. Oh, I don't really have clients yet, but I'm going to go to this networking thing. It is terrifying because you're around quote unquote successful business owners who been in business for 10 years, 20 years, like have all the things but you got to get in those rooms anyway. Push yourself, right?
Oh, 100%. And the most awkward part of those networking meetings, I've been to hundreds, if not thousands of them, is when you first walk in and you know absolutely nobody, like zero people. You may know one person, but they're talking to somebody down the back, right? And so you're walking around and there's groups, they've already formed groups, and you
Mm.
literally have to go in and stand there. And sometimes what happens is that nobody talks to you. And you're like, well, should I just go home?
Yeah.
No, don't go home. Just because what I found with those groups, everybody feels the same. Everybody is feeling the same as you are. And if you go home, you've taken away a great opportunity to block through those opportunities of extending your network.
Absolutely. And the first is the worst. I've gone to a few networking events now, not many, but more, and I'm finding it so much easier because then again, people start to recognize you and you go, "Oh, hey, weren't you at the last thing?" And it gets easier and you get more confident. You're like, "Okay, I've been to more awkward things than this now. This is going to be a piece of cake, right?"
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
And I think finally, something that I've been sticking in my mind that I do want to mention that it's worth reiterating if I've said this before and I'm going to say it again is that you shouldn't really be taking advice from people who aren't on a similar path to you or ahead of you in some way, right? So like someone who's playing A grade soccer isn't probably going to take advice from someone who's in the sixth grade division, right? If like I think you were mentioning before is that, friends and family might have opinions about your business or what you want to start or what your dreams are, but if they've never done it, if they're never gonna do it, why are you taking advice from them or opinions from them?
Oh, 100%. That's so true. And I love the way you articulated that. And, over my journey, I've got relatives who have never started a business trying to give me advice. I've got relatives who are educationalists who talk about business but have never owned a business trying to give me advice. My rule is I only take advice from people who have actually been in the trenches and know what it's like uh, in terms of business. Um, because until you've been in the trenches, Sheena, and I mean the trenches, and you've been in the trenches, I've been in the trenches, and it's rough in there. Until you've been in there, you really don't know what's coming at you. And if somebody has not been in the trenches and is trying to tell me what to do, I just find it really hard with respect to them, I just find it really hard to take the advice from them. I'd rather find people like you, who are people in the trenches, been there, and who are still in the trenches, and we're still learning from each other and still growing from each other and still wanting to get 1% better every single day in our lives. And we're going to get knockers when we try to whenever you try to do something, especially like you say in Australia, New Zealand, especially whenever you try to do something really, really cool, really awesome, you're just going to get people who are going to just try to bring you back to like, no, you need to be here because this is where I'm comfortable with you. Yeah.
Yeah, they're looking at version 1 of you when you might be version 11 and you're like,
But
it's not
yeah.
that anymore. And I think when you start to elevate, they can either come up with you, or it's just going to highlight that they have not elevated. They're exactly where they always are. And that's why they pull you down, because it's like, okay, I'm still where I am and I don't like that feeling, so I'm going to knock you down. It's a projection stuff, right? So Steve, it's been such an amazing conversation. It went a bit different to what my usual interviews go like, but I loved it. I think people are going to get a lot from this, conversation and hearing this. So a couple of things. One, if you could impart any kind of actionable advice or something that you really want people listening to this to walk away with, what would that be?
Um, it would be just to be kind to yourself. And what I mean by that, Sheena, and if you talk about actionable, every morning, the first thing as part of my morning routine, because entrepreneurs, we're crazy like that. What we have routines for everything, right? But I actually have a morning routine, which I don't stop doing, is that I read something. Um, I've got this quote that I read every single morning, which reminds me how great I am and how good of a person I am. And that's the first thing that before I do anything else, I always read that, because I've learned over the years that that goes into my subconscious mind, and then in my subconscious is where the power is. So if I could just say anything to your audience today, is just to be kind to yourself, treat yourself gently, um, and know that you are amazing. And I'm not just saying that. You are amazing, and you can achieve anything if you're willing to put in a little bit of hard yakka and belief. It can go a long, long way.
Oh, amazing, Steve. What a nice thing to put out to people. And yeah, that the power of like looking at those things first thing in the morning and before you go to bed, incredible. So, where can people find you? If they want to find you, if they want to connect to you, all of that, where are the best places for people to connect to you?
I'm on Insta, so they can see me on Instagram at brand BRAND Steph STE triple F at brand Steph. Same at brand Steph on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn under Steve Fazakerley. Trying to get my socials a lot better. Trying to catch up to you. I'm a little ways behind you, Sheena, but we'll get there.
We'll get there. TikTok's the place to be. So,
I heard TikTok's the place. Oh, I'm on TikTok too, actually.
oh,
Yeah.
are you? Okay, well, let me follow you. Let the listeners follow you, so then that way, we can boost that algorithm, right? So, look, it was such a good conversation. We're going to have to do this again sometime, but thanks for being on the podcast, Steve. And for all the listeners listening, thank you for tuning into another episode of the 4Q podcast. If you're crazy enough to be one of the people who is in this space and has listened this far, you're going places, because not everyone will take the time out to listen to a podcast like this today. So even that you've done this and you've listened, if you take one little bit from this, you're already ahead of the rest. All right, have a wonderful day. I will see you in the next episode.